Hi, everyone. Thank you, D'Angela. Good morning, everyone. It's been really neat seeing like so many of my friends here, and also just seeing how many people are here. It's amazing. Um, so with that, yeah, thank you so much, D'Angela, for making this happen all the time. I'm really excited. This is the first time that I'm being part of one of these polished solid symposiums, and yeah, it's obviously very different than what we thought it was going to be. But I was commenting, this platform, it has so much more of a community feel than I would have imagined for something that is online. It really did feel a lot yesterday, like the first days of our days in either Manchester or Minneapolis for the other folks, or the other symposiums that we've done. I also want to start by telling you all that my presentation today is a little bit more of a work in progress than I had intended it to be, for a couple reasons. First being just the reality of the world right now, and that, when we originally this was going to be done in April, and I'm definitely always a last minute person. And as it got shifted around, I kept putting off getting to it. And obviously, just with where the world has been, it was really hard to get focused onto this project, both in addition to what's happening in the world, but also because I've been re-obsessed with the Rainbow Children lately. And obviously, those are two very different mind spaces. From Dirty Mind to the Rainbow Children, both in terms of what those times were for Prince, what those messages were for Prince, and then especially from a queer perspective, very different. So, but on that note, it is also yesterday the presentations were so amazing. And I think the difference for this first time being in such a concentrated space, what I have found at the other conferences is always, if you don't present the first day, you hear other things that are like, oh, I need to add that in, or, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, even more so when everyone's talking about the same album. But actually it was really neat because I really found that through a lot of the presentations, that was really the through line that a lot of people were talking about, is how Dirty Mind was really such a starting point for Prince, in a way, with just what it meant for his image, for who he was going to become throughout the rest of his career, and really defining him as an artist. And that, again, Edgar's presentation just now, again, kind of touched on that same theme. And that's very much where I was, with my original thesis, where I was going, but simply, from the queer perspective. And so let's see, where am I? So Dirty Mind. Dirty Mind was released about a month before my 10th birthday. But I didn't hear it till sometime after 1984. Sadly, I don't remember exactly when that was. But what I do remember is that the groove of Dirty Mind, the song, was immediately hypnotic. And that's something that is the same today. I hear that and right away, it's like, it just takes me into that hypnotic space. Yeah, okay, so the running theme of Dirty Mind, and sorry, I got to switch screens, and the idea of it, Dirty Mind being a starting point. So I really like looking at the album covers with that idea of, that the first album was kind of an introduction, the second one was more of a pop access, and then the third album was really seeing Prince for the first time, as who he truly was. And it's something that I think just within even the covers leading up to that point, you really see that difference, where on the first album we see Prince's face, just his face. For Prince, we get a little bit more, and then Dirty Mind, now we have almost the full image, and definitely it tells us so much more, that image, than what the other two did. Of course, sexuality was important to Prince through all of that work, but the queer sensibility, I think, really does not arrive until Dirty Mind. And basically, you know, once we get to Dirty Mind, it's not like For You, where we have teens who are thinking about, oh, you know, what are the eyes of our baby going to look like? Or with I Feel For You, of getting a warm feeling inside. We've now progressed from that to now he's walking the streets of your fine city, and a random girl walks up to ask him if he's gay. And then possibly on the same street, a virgin on her way to be wed tells him that he's a hunk full of spunk and that she wants to give him head. That's a pretty big leap, and definitely much more queer to be looking at those options versus just getting a warm feeling inside. And obviously with this era, both lyrically and with the images, you know, as Edgar talked about, that the importance of his images and imagery, and obviously we talk about that all the time because it's so relevant to who Prince is and was. It's a pretty easy read from the queer sensibility to look at these. So I don't think it doesn't require a lot of thought or discussion to talk about, you know, what is obviously queer about the presentation and obviously the lyrics throughout the album. And I think going back also to that theory of Dirty Mind being a template for what was to come, I think a great reminder of that is going to 1988 and the Love Sexy tour. And just the fact that within this show, you know, that is such a production and storytelling, that the first half is very much represented, or Dirty Mind is very much represented in that first half of, you know, the lewd sexual part of the show. We have Dirty Mind, When You Were Mine, and Head, and sometimes Sister. So, and just this too, I love the look. We've gone from just little bikini, only the bikini and leg warmers, up to a fully clothed outfit that is actually even more queer. So that's just kind of that connection of the really obvious queerness. What I'm more interested in, I think both just because of where we are in the world, but also looking beyond the obvious with queerness, is the queerness of politics and identity, and really looking at this idea of ethics para joder, which is a theory from Miguel de la Torre, who's a professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at ILIF School of Theology. And let's see, Dr. de la Torre, he had a kind of brush with internet fame in around 2005. He was fired from his position at Hope College when he criticized James Dobson from Focus on the Family for outing SpongeBob as gay. And it was great. The article was called "When the Bible is Used for Hate." And this is his quote: I always knew there was something fishy about a sponge who openly held hands with a pink starfish. God only knows what illicit acts are taking place at SpongeBob's neighborhood, appropriately named Bikini Bottom, all caps, thanks to the vigilant eyes of James Dobson, who credits himself for bringing about the president's re-election. We can now shield our children from SpongeBob the sex fiend. Beyond the satire of that article, he does then go on to ask, does not Christ call us to love our white, black, Latina, Native American, and yes, gay neighbor as ourselves? So from that point, though, he was fired from Hope and then ended up at Aleph, where he is now. But he has a pretty interesting story. He was born in Puerto Rico, grew up, by his own words, as extremely poor in New York City, decided he never wanted to be poor, made a lot of money in real estate, and then found religion. And as we know, adults often do when they convert later in life, he was very extreme and became a Southern Baptist, and was very much into the very judgmental side of what some of that faith can be. And ironically, it was as a student, as a theology student and Southern Baptist, the theologians who he was assigned to read did not speak to him at all. And so he went to the library and pulled all of the books that were in Spanish. And as it turned out, all of the Spanish books in the Bible college that he was at were all from Central American priests, and they all very much had communist ideals. So it very much influenced who he was and really changed the trajectory of what his thoughts were around religion. And his focus now is social ethics within contemporary U.S. thought, specifically how religion affects race, class, and gender oppression. So the idea of ethics para joder, I'm going to read you something, a quote from a movie where he's explaining it. Joder, if you do not know, is Spanish for fuck, basically. So let's see. This is his quote. What do you do with hopelessness? And it is what I call an ethics para joder, which, if you know any Spanish, joder is not a word you use in polite conversation. It's similar to a certain four-letter word that begins with F. So it's an ethic that screws with the system. If everything is lost, if it's hopeless, if you're not going to win, then the only other option you have is to screw with the structures, to play the trickster, to mess with the system, and do it in an ethical way. His inspiration for this idea came from the Young Lords, who were a group in both Chicago and New York, primarily Puerto Rican, who were fighting for just justice for themselves and their communities. And this is a shot from one of their protests. And here you see the Vietnam, Harlem, Puerto Rico, El Barrio, Dominican Republic. It's the same struggle. To me, that very much reads as, white, black, Puerto Rican, everybody just a freaking, you're going to have to fight your own damn war, or we don't let society tell us how it's going to be. One of the significant actions that the Young Lords did went to a Methodist church that was or supposed to be serving the Puerto Rican community that it was in, and they felt that it was not. So they went to the pastor there and asked him to start serving the community in a more real and practical way. And he basically said, "Get out of here, you commies. That's not what we're doing." So they went in and basically took over the church. They, they threw the pastor out, nailed a sign on the wall that said Church of the People. And then the church, which had been empty in the Puerto Rican neighborhood, was now packed on Sunday or on all Sundays, and very much serving the community for an extended period. I don't know the exact time, but they were very successful in establishing themselves within that that space. And they also, in terms of their ideas around self-determination, oops, did I get? Okay, yeah, no, sorry. In Chicago, they were also relevant, part of an early version of the Rainbow Coalition, which was uniting the Young Lords, Black Panthers, and Young Patriots. And so again, it was groups who were very much interested in disturbing the system, not playing the games of what the government or what society said it should be to really affect real change. Obviously, there are then very real connections between this movement and Black Lives Matter, and particularly with what is happening right now. Let's see. And the Young Lords, again, primarily in New York and Chicago. An interesting thing that I actually just discovered last night when I went on a frenzy after all of what we learned yesterday from Christopher Daniels' presentation. He shared this yesterday, the article that People Said Woke Warner's Records by Pablo Guzman. Pablo Guzman was actually, in addition to being a journalist and the person who wrote this piece about Dirty Mind, both the album and the Rich show, is also one of the key founders of the New York chapter of the Young Lords. So again, just an amazing tie, I think, of what these beliefs and values, you know, how they are all tied in together to this narrative of people of color doing this work, and doing it, you know, both looking at arts and how that is a part of our real world, and that it's not something that is incidental to who we are as people or to how we express ourselves or how we live our lives. And, you know, very different from what typically is a white critical approach that is much more sterile and academic. Whoa, sneak preview. So let's see. The other thing, so what really, like anyone who was here yesterday, definitely just completely came alive in hearing Seeley speak. That was just an amazing presentation, and it really, for me, nailed home, just listening to it, very much that idea of what Dirty Mind was for Prince was really his opportunity to fully present himself as a Black man, to present himself in his entirety, you know, without any kind of interference. And I think that the truth in who he was in Dirty Mind and how he presented himself and what he presented is really, I think, what makes Dirty Mind so not only meaningful, but universal. And where he was speaking very much of his experience as a Black man, particularly with rooting it within his sexuality, I think that very much spoke to his queer audiences of signaling that we too could also imagine a lives for ourselves within this world that was much different than the role or the rules that society was telling us that we could live. And that specifically, I want to share a quote from yesterday's presentation, and that is this. Dirty Mind represents the Black individual asserting his rights to be an individual and have his place in the world through the most subverted and taboo needs, his body and his sexuality. Through sex and sexuality, Prince wishes to transform America into a new place, a primitive utopia based on sexual and racial tolerance. And through the blending of music styles, imagery, and stereotypes, Prince is attempting to construct the world for the individual by amalgamating history. Through Dirty Mind, Prince changed how people thought about race and how people thought about masculinity and how people thought about the music that Black folks can play. Again, and that was from Seeley McGinnis Definitely make sure you check out that presentation along with everything yesterday. There was so much great work. And again, I think just so many overlapping lines from all of the presentations, and again, even continuing this morning, of the intentionality of what Prince always did from day one, but then specifically how by the point of Dirty Mind, he was then at a point where it really did have a queer sensibility, to use a line from queer activists, of not gay as in happy, but queer as in fuck you. So very much just saying, this is who I am, take it or leave it. I think summed up very well through the quote that Edgar used this morning, of just talking about, you know, he didn't want the audience that was just going to be there for the hits. He wanted the audience that was going to move with him, knowing that he was going to continue to be that person who was speaking openly and honestly about who he was. And by consistently doing that, he signaled to all of his followers, his fans, purple heads, whatever you want to call us, that we also could have and find that same liberation through his work to be our full selves. All right, and that is the end.